I know what I'm doing. And he proceeded to bat the air 3 more times. What is it? I squealed, as my throat contracted in fear. I don't know yet, but whatever it is, it's not alive. Oh boy, if I wait for you, we will be here all night. I walked bravely to the object and sniffed it. Well, asked Chester. Beats me. Chester came closer. After a moment of close examination, he gasped. I jumped. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Harold, Chester blurted. What? Yes? What is it, Chester? It's a white zucchini. Chapter 5. Chester goes into his act. The next morning, I was awakened by a scream. Robert, come down here right away. There's something wrong in the kitchen. For a moment, panic seized me. I thought the sheep would run out of dog food, but then I remembered the events of the previous evening. Mr. Monroe came bounding down the stairs. Chester, I cried. Did you see Mr. Monroe? His face has turned white. It's funicular, isn't it? No, he said calmly. It's a shaving cream, you idiot. By now, the excitement in the kitchen was at full throttle. The table was covered with funicular's handiwork. There were white beans and white peas and white squash and white tomatoes and white lettuce and white zucchini. What can it mean, Robert? Mrs. Monroe was saying. I'm getting worried. One tomato is a curiosity, but this is unheard of. There must be something wrong with our refrigerator. That's it. It's turning all the vegetables white. But look, she said. I left these tomatoes on the windowsill, and they are white too. And this squash I left in the bowl on the table. At that moment, Peter and Toby came into the kitchen. Holy cow, what's going on? Hey, maybe it's a vegetable blight, Mom. Could that be, Robert? Did you ever hear of anything like that? Well, no, actually. That is, I've heard of blight, but nothing like this. Chester leaned my way. This will take forever if we leave it up to them. If we leave them up to them. Sometimes human beings can be so slow. I started to answer him, but he was heading for the table. What about that friend of yours in the agriculture department? Oh, Tom Cragen? Could we call him and ask him if we were doing something wrong? It's DDT, Mom, Peter interjected. I know about this stuff. It's because you buy vegetables that aren't organic. All vegetables are organic, Peter, Mrs. Monroe replied. That's not what my teacher says. See, Toby, I told you this would happen. They are using chemicals on our food, and if you are not careful, you will turn white too. Like that? Robert, couldn't you take that shaving cream off your face? Oh yes, of course. Where's my towel? I know I brought it down with me. For that matter, where was Chester? I'd seen him going toward the table, but I'd lost track of him listening to all that talk about DDT. I just hoped that they didn't use any of that stuff where they grew chocolate cupcakes. Pete, did you take my towel? Why would I take your towel, Dad? I don't shave. Just then, the door swung open. I could not believe my eyes. There was Chester, with Mr. Monroe's towel draped across his back and tied under his neck like a cape. That was strange enough, but on his face was an expression that sent chills down my spine. His eyes were wide and staring. The corners of his mouth were pulled back in an evil grimace. His teeth were bared and gleaming. In the morning light, he cackled menacingly and threw back his head as if he were laughing at all of us. I thought he'd completely lost his mind. There's my towel. What's the matter, Chester? Were you cold? Mr. Murnau bent down to take the towel from Chester. Before he could lay his hands on it, Chester flipped over onto his back, closed his eyes, and pulled his paws over his chest. It was a hideous sight. He opened his eyes wide, with paws outstretched. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes glazed and vacant. Soon the upper half of his body followed, all in one smooth flow, until he was in a sitting position. Hey, Dad, did you leave your brandy glass out last night? Chester is acting a little weird. Well, son, cats are funny creatures. I glanced at Chester. He wasn't laughing. Psst, Chester, what are you up to? I'm a vampire, you idiot. You dolt. Can't you tell? I'm trying to warn them. Well, it's not working. You'd better think of something else, Chester frowned, apparently deep in thought. So you see, Toby, Mr. Murnau was explaining, all cats are as individual as all people. Maybe he just wants to get our attention. Isn't that right, Kitty Cat? Ordinarily, Chester would have left the room upon being called a kitty cat, but he was lost in thought. Come on, Chester, give me back my towel. Mr. Murnau moved toward Chester. Chester's eyes lit up. He looked at me and smiled. I sensed I was not going to like what he had in mind. I was toying with the notion of slinking under the table when Chester picked me with his eyes. How deep they were, like black pools. I felt myself floating, lost in them, my will no longer my own. I felt an inexplicable urge to murmur, Yes, master. When he walked slowly, steadily toward me, as he drew nearer, I found myself unable to move. He stopped before me, never taking his gaze from me, and lunged. Yo! Mom, Chester bit Harold on the neck. Oh, that wasn't a real bite, was it, Chester? That was a love bite. Isn't that cute? Love bite? My foot? That hurt. Chester, what's the matter? What's the matter with you? I sputtered. Do you look like a tomato? Do I look like a tomato? Oh, it doesn't matter anyway, Harold. They don't understand. How can human beings read the same books I do and still be so thick? Our conversation was interrupted. Mrs. Murnau picked Chester up and cuddled him. I was praying she would not add insult to injury by kissing his nose, which he hates more than anything. Poor Chester, do you need a little love? Do you know what I'm going to do? You big ball of fuzz, you. I couldn't tell what was coming. I'm going to kiss you on your little nose. Yap! I could tell that was coming. All right. Chester knew better than to resist. He went limp in Mrs. Murnau's arms. Mr. Murnau took his towel off Chester. I still don't know why he's wearing my towel, he said. I think he must be cold, dear. Here's your towel. Why don't you get his kitty sweater? Chester looked ill, and he can wear that all day. As Chester was being buttoned into his bright yellow sweater, with the little purple mice and cowboy hats all over it, Mr. Murnau said, What about those vegetables? Shall I speak to Tom Cragen? Yes, dear, Mrs. Murnau said. Why don't you? I'm sure there's some explanation. In the meantime, I'll change markets. To tell you the truth, I'm really much more worried about Chester. We'd better keep our eye on him. Chester and I did not speak until late afternoon. I was busy nursing my neck, and Chester was busy hiding under the sofa, too embarrassed to be seen. When we did speak at last, it was a brief exchange. Hey, Chester, I called when he finally crawled out from under. We don't have to worry about any vampire bunnies anymore. All you have to do is stand outside his cage in that sweater, and he will laugh himself to death. Chester was not amused. That's right, make fun. All of you. No one understands. I tried to warn them, and they wouldn't heed. Now, I'm going to take matters into my own hands. Whereupon, Chester and his 16 purple mice went into the kitchen for dinner. Chapter 6. Harold Helps Out. That night, I had an uneasy sleep. Strange noises emanated from downstairs. It sounded like toenails were clicking back and forth on the floor. It must be Bunicular making his midnight run, I thought, although I'd never known him to make a sound. And I smelled the funniest odor in the air. Something familiar, though I couldn't place it. As the night progressed, it grew stronger and stronger until finally it trickled my nose and I sneezed myself awake. I jumped off Toby's bed, still sniffling, and headed down the stairs for the living room to find Chester, to see if he could smell it too. The odor grew even stronger as I approached the living room. Standing in the doorway was Chester, a strange pendant hanging from his neck. Phew! Phew, Chester, I said. Were you wearing that awful thing for? It smells. Of course it smells, he replied. Here, I made one for you to put it on. Are you kidding? That thing smells like a garlic. It is garlic. Chester started matter-of-factly. Why are you wearing garlic? I asked, thinking that by this time Chester was capable of anything. As we walked into the living room, I tripped on another piece of garlic lying in the doorway. Careful, said Chester. Watch your step. I surveyed the room and saw that it was strewn with garlic. On the doorways, over the windows, and around Bunicular's cage, the poor little fellow had buried his nose as far as possible under his blanket. I was about to follow his example and return to Toby's bed to bury my nose under the blankets when Chester grabbed my tail with his teeth. You're not leaving this room until you put this on, he grumbled at me. I think that's what he said. I wasn't sure because he had my tail in his mouth. It's not polite to talk with your mouth full, Chester. Drop that tail. Meanwhile, my eyes were beginning to water. Listen, Chester snapped at me, personally letting go of my tail first. The book said to use garlic. What book? I asked. The Joy of Cooking? Chester continued. The mark of the vampire says garlic renders vampires immobile. What does that mean? It means they can't go anywhere if there's garlic around. Well, I've got news for you, Chester. I can't go anywhere either. The smell is killing me, but you've got to put it on. It says so in the book. If you don't put it on, I'll put it on for you. No, Chester, I said as my nose suddenly and involuntarily closed. I'd be leaving this room right now, and I did. I was so sick to my stomach from the aroma that I decided to spend the early morning hours outdoors. As dawn approached, it seemed that it would be a peaceful day. The sky was clear, the birds were singing, and I felt contented after my difficult night just to be lying in the grass, feeling the ladybugs crawl up my ears. Suddenly, the calm was broken. Strange, piercing screams came from the area of the kitchen. Not again, I thought. What turned white now? As it happened, it was Chester. There in the sink, laddered with soap, was the felon detective yelling his head off. Mrs. Murner was scrubbing him by vigorously, and from the sound of her voice was in the middle of a long lecture. I don't know what's gotten into you, Chester. You never played with a garlic before. I thought you hated the smell of it, and here you've gotten it all over yourself. Stop wiggling. You will get soap in your eyes. If you want to chew on something, I will get you some catnip. But stay out of my herbs. Then he rinsed him off, rubbed him with a towel, and plunked him down in front of the stove to finish drying. Shut the door. He hissed at me. I'm freezing. That silly woman. Doesn't she know cats don't get baths? What do you mean? I get baths all the time, I said, closing the door with my back foot. That's because you are too dumb to bath yourself. Cats always bath themselves. It's a rule. Everyone knows that. Well, at least it smells nice in here again, I sniffed as I settled down next to Chester by the stove, and it's all toasty warm here in the kitchen. Sure, it smells nice again, he said, but now the house isn't safe anymore. What do you mean? I asked, getting closer. I mean, it worked last night. The garlic worked. No more vegetables turned white, did they? No, but that means Bunnicula didn't get out of his cage last night. Maybe he was just tired, I said, or maybe he was full. Don't be ridiculous, he replied. It was the garlic. He couldn't leave his cage, but tonight he will be free to roam again, and I've got to find a way to stop him that isn't smelly. Mr. and Mrs. Murner were hurrying in and out of the room, stepping over us, late for work. Mrs. Murner yelled up to Toby, Don't forget to take the steak out of the freezer when you get home today, Toby, and leave it on the table to defrost. And this time, remember to put a plate under it. Chester's ears perked up. Of course, he said. That's what I'll do. And he strolled past me with a knowing smile. Mrs. Murner turned off the stove and left the room. It was too much for me to figure out, so I went to sleep on the nice, warm kitchen floor. I was awakened by a bite on the ear. Chester was sitting by me, looking very impatient. Boy, nothing wakes you up, he said. I've been yelling and poking at you for 10 minutes. I was dreaming, I answered, defensively, about a place where there weren't any cats around to bother nice dogs and wake them up when they needed their rest. You can finish sleeping later, he said crisply. Right now, you have to help me. Do what? I asked. Get Bunnicula out of the cage. I sprang back. Get him out of the cage? I thought that was what you did. You didn't want. I thought you said he was dangerous. What if he attacks me? Aren't you ashamed? Chester replied. Afraid of a harmless little bunny? Harmless? I thought you said he was a threat to this house and everyone in it. Isn't that what you said? Isn't that what we've been talking about all this time? He is a treat, but only at night. During the day, he's just a very sleepy rabbit. And that's why we have to do it now, while the sun is still up. Follow me, he said. There isn't much